You probably heard all the terms like blinder, for example, like strobe and so on. What are all these things mean? Well, basically, here, if we specify here that you have moving heads, then if it's not a moving head, normally we tend to call them static lights, right? And if you have a static light, depends on what you're looking for. You might be looking for a front light or a back light, center light, maybe what we call it a nadir position, so you have it on the floor for doing a special effect to to improve the feeling of texture in the background. You have many different options, of course, and that depends more on the type of lighting design that you want to create. But we have some standards here as well. So one standard, I would say the most popular standard is a wash light. And a wash light or a washer, you will hear like that. Sometimes for architectural application, you have this as a wall washer that is specifically for illuminating walls, normally from a closer distance. Sometimes you will hear different definitions, but in general, a wash, it's doing the same idea that you have here, just covering with color a specific area. So we can say this is about color, right? With different optics. So normally, static washes don't have a zoom, don't have the possibility of changing the size of the beam, covering more or covering less with a mechanical lens going in and out, which is more popular in these washes, right? It's not that common to see washes without zoom, some of them are. But in here, it's very rare to see washes without the zoom. In case of SEM, for example, a wash is a P5 or a P6. These are washes, and normally you have intermediate lenses, 45 degree, 30 degree, or the new washes, the new tendency is to have washes with a very narrow beam angle in the beginning, like a 10 degree, that you can shape afterwards with filters. You have some videos here as well, where we define how you do that with the P6, for example. So that's a wash. That's a wash, and sometimes you ask the wash to do other things, but that's basically the purpose of the wash. You can use it for making a wall, a cyclorama sometimes, any background. Sometimes you use it as a direct view facing the audience. Sometimes if you have a lot of haze, you use it to create a wall of light in the air, right? So that's the wash. Then you have what we call flood. A floodlight, it's a wash. Let's say it in an easy way, let's define it as a wash that you can't control. Because the wash is a light that, a type of light that using accessories, more or less, you can control, you can direct, you can modify, you can modulate. But in the flood lighting, normally it's just, this is what you get. Normally you want a lot of output coming out of the flood and a good color mixing system. That's why both wash and flood, normally they are RGB sources. These days, it's very rare to find a wash or a flood in the market that is based on filters to generate colors. Normally, all of them are LED and RGB. So in a flood, basically what you have is a very wide angle, right? So if in the wash you are talking something in between 10 degree and let's say 60 degree, more or less. In a floodlight, normally you are from 80 degree to 120 degree, more or less. So wide angle, definitely wider, to cover more, to cover an area in a better way. And unlike in the washes, it's very common to see floodlights facing the audience, to cover a big area also in the air, right, to generate an atmosphere. But again, as I said, the flood is also based on color, right? So a different type of light, it's a blinder. And in blinder there are two very defined looks, let's say. One look is like the old fashion blinders based on tungsten or halogen lamps, where you can see all these dots, and that's the typical moment where the artist asks the audience to do something, for example, and all the audience gets illuminated by these fixtures. And that's the typical blinder that our minds have associated with the big tours, right, of the old times. But in these days, it's very, very uncommon to see these blinders. What you see more and more and more, it's washes or floodlights with different shapes sometimes, linear shapes, but working as blinders, just facing the audience. So it's very common to see a wash blinder or flood blinder, right? Basically, whatever light is facing the audience and generating a blinding effect, that's a blinder, right? And again, you can see them in color, but sometimes you see it in white as well, because sometimes what you just want to have is this audience illuminated, but you don't necessarily want to integrate blinders in your cues. Depending on the type of fixture and the effect that it gives, and if it's disturbing or not, if it's ruining the contrast or not for your other scenes, you will use it more or less, right? But that's a blinder, and normally the blinders tend to be in this range as well. So I would say that the standardized blinder is 100 degree, and why? Because normally when you're illuminating an audience, in a big festival, for example, you have people in the center, and those are going to see your lights and your scenes in a perfect way, like in the TV, but the ones that are in the sides, then they will be illuminated differently by the blinder, and they will have a different show. They will see a different show. So the more narrow the blinder is, the less coverage you will get, so these people in the sides will not be covered. So that's why they tend to be wide as possible. So you have a wash, you have a flood, you have a blinder, then you have something that used to be very common in the old days, not that common these days, which is a Fresnel or a PC, a planar convex projector. These are theatrical projectors, very common in the old days. You have a lot of nice options these days as well in LED as well. Normally you use this for broadcast as a front lighting. So they call it Fresnel or PC depending on the lens that you can see, the front lens that you can see. So Fresnel lens is a very old design coming from the beacons, from the light houses in the old times, with these different rings that allow you to have a very nice balance between very spotted light with a lot of power and a very nice wash, a wide spread. So if you use it for broadcast purposes, you will see a lot of Fresnels being used always in what we call flat position or wide position, while when you see in the theater, sometimes you see it in between. You will see actually more planar convex than Fresnels in the theaters. Well, sometimes depending on the area that you need to cover and the height you're working at, if you normally in a theater you work between 7 and 10 meters, you will see different positions. But it's really strange to see any of them at a very narrow position, what we call a spot, unless it's an effect, right? So the Fresnels, MPCs, then it's not that important the color. You have a lot of Fresnels and MPCs that are white only, and then if you want to filter, you just use a filter on top as an accessory, and that's very common. That's a practice in movies and broadcast, TV and theater. This is a routine, you know. These guys have been doing this for many years, and so it's quite common to use filters in there. But you have a lot of options these days with RGB fixtures that are able to generate colors with LED and so on. And when you're talking about Fresnels, then definitely you're talking about some kind of a zoom, which is basically moving in and out the light source towards the front lens or far away from the front lens. So it's normal to see something in between 9 degrees, sometimes 6 degrees, to 60 degree. That's quite common in a Fresnel, right? You have a lot of aperture, you need a lot of aperture, and also when you're using these fixtures, the output, it's important, but not that much. It's more about the quality of the light, because you are normally illuminating at intermediate distances. So with a Fresnel, you're illuminating at 5 meters to make a front light, for example, for TV. That's the typical way of using a Fresnel, unless you have you're simulating a moon or something like that in a movie where you want to throw from sometimes 25 meters away, even more, and then you use this big 18,000 watt Fresnels, things like that, with using these jazz lamps or tungsten or so on. But they are present in stage lighting, they are present in rentals, it's a common fixture. Another one is definitely what we call ellipsoidal sometimes, profile, we can call it like that. This is somehow a static version of your profile in the movie heads, which basically come with these blades, normally manual blades, that you can put in and out to shape the light again, to make this kind of shape, whatever you want, a triangle or whatever. You have gobos as well that you can add into the fixture. None of them have gobos, but this one has. And you can filter it as well. You can generate colors with it. They are becoming very popular in color as well, but you can find them in white. So again, it's white and color, and this is you know, this is where we are coming from, these two, right? From the old times. It's a very theatrical fixture that you can use in corporate events. Sometimes you see it in TV as well. It's a very versatile fixture that allows you to shape the light and to sharpen the edges of the light or to soften them, especially for backgrounds and so on. Quite rare that you use it as front light unless you are doing a tour and you have a very spotted position for one of your musicians. Normally you see them more to do backgrounds and things like that. So this is more or less the kind of static fixtures, standardized static lights that you can get in the market. Just have in mind that, of course, a wash, when you are working with very narrow beam angles, then the wash becomes a narrow wash, or sometimes they call it a spot. You have all these options, these different options, plus many others that you will find in the market, because, of course, there's a lot of static lights. We are not mentioning here the linears or the dots or any pixel mapping specific static lights, that you have a lot of them, which could be in a group that is called direct view fixtures. But sometimes you get these standardized fixtures into one fixture only. So it's quite common that you see a wash, a flood, a blinder into something called all-in-one, which is fixtures that are good, working as a blinder. They can do definitely a floodlight, and depending on the distance, they can work very good as washes. So I'm thinking a Q7, for example, that it's more or less this kind of light. It works really nice as a blinder in a festival, even if you have it at long distances. It's definitely a floodlight, that's what a Q7 is. But if you use it in close distances, 2.5 meters, 4 meters, then it works really nice as a wash, especially if you have it on the floor as a front light or in the back. So that's what all-in-one means. Normally, an all-in-one includes the application or the possibility of doing a strobe, right? Which is another category here that we could have as a static light, a strobe light, that in the old days used to be, this stroboscopic effect was coming from a xenon lamp or a discharge lamp, or, you know, typically a xenon lamp that has a lot of power and used to just do these pulses that you can, of course, kind of simulate here in the movie heads with a shutter. But the strobes these days are LED based, most of them, and then you can find some of them that are RGB based, some of them are white based, depending on the application. Some of them keep the linear look. You see only one line of a light source. Sometimes you see it all around, like a brick of light. And usually they call it brick strobes. So that's more or less what you get in normally premium washes. It's a combination of all of them, and depending the way of usage, the lenses that you are using, the type of light source that you have, it will be more a wash, a flood, a blinder. Similar to what happened with the hybrid, similar, because definitely if you have a dedicated wash with a specific degree in your lens for a specific application, that will be definitely a better solution than have an all-in-one. But you can combine them, and we can agree that an all-in-one in a static light tends to be a better light for different applications, tends to be more versatile than what you can get with a hybrid fixture compared to moving heads. More difficult to see Fresnels or profiles as a static luminaires being combined together. Right? Okay, thanks for watching. Let's talk soon about other matters.